What do you do when your enemy buries their most dangerous weapons so deep underground that no bomb on Earth can reach them? That is not a hypothetical. That was the exact problem the United States sat with for 15 years, quietly behind closed doors, while Iran kept digging. If this kind of content keeps you thinking, hit like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to understand what modern warfare actually looks like. Because this story is not what the headlines told you. Let's go back to the beginning. Somewhere inside the mountain ranges of Iran, engineers spent 20 years doing something that had never been done before. Not building a bunker, not digging a depot. They were building a city, an entire underground city, carved through some of the hardest rock on the planet, designed for one single purpose: to make Iran's weapons impossible to destroy. Think about what that actually took. 20 years. A massive portion of the country's defense budget. Thousands of workers cutting through solid granite, building rail systems inside tunnels wide enough to drive a missile launcher through. Assembly halls, maintenance bays, storage chambers, concealed exits scattered across hundreds of kilometers of mountain terrain. The launchers themselves were built to travel through this underground rail network, roll out to a hidden opening on the surface, fire, and disappear back into the mountain before anyone could even trace where the missile had come from. Now, picture trying to fight that. You are not hunting a missile. You are hunting a door. And the mountain has dozens of doors. Most of them look identical from above. Most of them are connected underground, so the weapons inside can be moved between exits without ever appearing on the surface. It is like trying to stop one car from leaving a parking garage with 50 exits, where all the exits look the same, where tunnels run between them underground, and where the garage itself is inside a mountain. You can watch every exit you know about. You can destroy a few of them, but unless you know exactly which exit the car is heading toward and exactly when, the car just waits. It waits until you look somewhere else. Then it comes out. That was the logic Iran spent 2 decades building, and for a long time it worked perfectly. If your weapons cannot be found, they cannot be destroyed. If they cannot be destroyed, the no-air campaign can never fully disarm you. The entire strategy rested on that single idea, but there was one facility inside that network that was in a completely different category. Not because of the missiles it held, because of what it was quietly moving toward producing. This facility was hidden inside a mountain near one of Iran's holy cities. Its existence was kept secret from international inspectors for years before intelligence services finally identified it. The mountain above it rises more than 200 feet at the relevant point. The facility itself sits somewhere between 80 and 90 meters underground, and inside, Iran had been accumulating uranium enriched to a level just below what is needed to build a nuclear weapon. Just below, not far below, just below. International assessments concluded that the stockpile sitting inside that mountain was already large enough, in theory, to produce multiple nuclear weapons if enrichment continued just a little further. The number you need to understand is this. Weapons-grade uranium generally begins at 90% purity. Iran's stockpile sat at roughly 84%. The distance between those two numbers is not measured in years of additional work. Under the right conditions, it is measured in days, sometimes less. That gap is why this one facility was never treated as just another location on a target list. It was treated as the clock itself, a countdown that was always running. Everything else Iran had built, the missile cities, the proxy forces operating across the region, the naval pressure in the strait, all of it existed partly to protect that clock from being stopped. Destroy everything else and leave this mountain standing, and Iran's deterrence still has a heartbeat. So for 15 years, American war planners had a problem. The facility they most needed to reach sat at 80 to 90 meters underground. And the most powerful conventional bunker-busting weapon they had could punch through approximately 60 meters of solid rock and concrete before detonating. 60 meters, against a target sitting at 80 to 90. That gap, 30 meters, maybe more, was the single most consequential engineering problem in American military planning for a decade and a half. And it was the reason the Pentagon poured years of additional development into a weapon called the massive Ordnance Penetrator. 30,000 pounds, more than 6 meters long. A steel casing engineered to survive, slamming through granite at high speed without shattering, so that 11 tons of explosive force could release at the correct depth, rather than wasting itself on the surface. On paper, it was the most powerful conventional weapon ever built. 10 times deeper penetration than any bunker buster previously available anywhere in the region. But the fuse was the hardest part. Granite does not behave like reinforced concrete. It is dense, uneven, and it fractures in ways that are difficult to model. A weapon that performs exactly right against a concrete test target can behave completely differently the moment it meets solid rock. It can deflect off harder seams inside the stone. It can lose momentum unevenly. It can detonate too early against a rock pocket that was never part of the test. The fuse on this weapon had to be intelligent enough to sense how many layers of rock it had already punched through in real time, counting them, holding the detonation and releasing only when the count matched the depth of the target exactly. And when all of that engineering was complete, when the weapon existed in its final form and sat on a test range having passed every evaluation required, it had still never been used. Not once. Not in any conflict. Not against any real target. Not by America, not by any ally, not by anyone in the history of modern warfare. It existed only on test ranges and inside classified assessments seen by a very small number of people. And only one aircraft in the entire American inventory could carry it, the B-2 stealth bomber. That is where everything was when the operation began. 7 B-2 stealth bombers lifted off and flew toward Iran. What followed became one of the longest stealth bomber missions in modern military history. Hour after hour over open ocean and contested airspace, refueling in midair, every segment of the route planned down to the second. More than 100 additional aircraft played supporting roles. Fifth-generation fighters flew ahead to clear the path. Electronic warfare platforms ran alongside them. Far below the surface of the water, a submarine positioned in the region quietly launched more than 24 cruise missiles toward a separate nuclear site. 3 facilities were targeted that night, but one of them was the entire reason the operation existed. At 2 of the other sites, the strikes followed a pattern of sudden, overwhelming force. One large enrichment complex that had been under international attention for years had its above-ground infrastructure left in ruins. A smaller research facility absorbed the submarine's cruise missiles, removing a piece of the production chain that fed material toward the deeper facilities. Both were significant. Neither was the reason 7 stealth bombers had flown thousands of miles in total darkness. The lead B-2 released its weapons over the mountain. Then, one after another, the remaining bombers struck their assigned points. In total, a dozen of these weapons were dropped onto 2 ventilation shafts, each bomb carrying its own individually calibrated fuse, each programmed to detonate at the precise depth needed to reach the chambers below. When satellite images came back afterward, there were craters where those ventilation shafts used to be. And here's the detail that changes how you understand everything that followed. Iran never saw any of it coming. Not a single aircraft was fired upon. Iranian radar did not detect the strike package entering Iranian airspace, did not detect it leaving. Iranian fighter jets never left the ground. The most heavily protected nuclear site in the country, buried under a mountain, surrounded by some of the most capable air defense systems in the Middle East, was struck by aircraft the country never even knew were there until the bombs were already falling. That was the first time in the history of warfare that this weapon had been used in actual combat. And it worked exactly as it was designed to. For Iran, the psychological damage may have been harder to absorb than the physical. The entire philosophy behind the mountain had rested on one belief: you will see us coming. You will have time to respond. That belief was broken on that night in the most complete way imaginable. Not a near miss, not a partial success. Total, silent, undetected success from the moment the bombers lifted off to the moment they crossed back out of Iranian airspace. Now pause here, because this is the point where most coverage of this story ends. Strike executed, weapon worked, mission accomplished. But that is not where the story ends. That is where the real story begins. Hey, real quick, if this is the kind of deep analysis that actually changes how you understand the world, share this video right now with someone who thinks they already know this story. They don't. And neither did most of the analysts covering it. Keep watching. When full-scale conflict broke out months after that initial strike, the campaign expanded into something on a completely different scale. What had been a precise, targeted operation against one facility became a systematic campaign against an entire underground network. Every missile city, every mountain range known to hide one, every tunnel entrance the United States and its allies could identify across the country. A second category of penetrating weapon entered the fight. Smaller than the one used against the nuclear facility, but purpose-built to punch through concrete and rock and function on the other side. These weapons made their own combat debut against hardened coastal missile storage sites near the Strait, the sites housing the cruise missiles Iran had been using to threaten shipping lanes. And at an airbase across the Atlantic, long-range bombers capable of carrying more than 30 tons of weapons each were loaded with heavy munitions and staged visibly in plain sight, where satellite imagery and ground observers could not miss them. Defense analysts watching that footage understood immediately what it meant. The campaign against Iran's underground arsenal was being expanded. More aircraft, more targets, more of the country, all at once. Staging those bombers where they could be seen was not a mistake. It was a message sent directly to decision-makers in Tehran. Every platform capable of reaching your mountains is now being positioned to do exactly that. But here is what almost nobody outside the planning rooms understood at the time. The actual goal of this entire expanded phase was not what most people assumed it was. The goal was not to destroy what was sitting inside the mountains. American planners understood something that 20 years of Iranian engineering had been built around from the very start. The missiles themselves, buried deep inside facilities specifically designed to survive aerial bombardment, were largely beyond the reach of even the most powerful conventional weapons available. No additional bombing campaign was going to change that fundamental reality. The chambers were too deep. The rock above them was too dense. The weapon that had worked against the nuclear facility had worked because that facility had specific ventilation shafts that could be targeted at precise coordinates. The rest of the underground missile network did not offer the same geometry. So the strategy changed. Instead of trying to reach the missiles, the campaign focused on the doors, strike the tunnel entrances, strike the access roads leading to the surface openings, strike every piece of surface infrastructure connecting those underground cities to the launch positions above ground. The logic was simple and it was brutal. A missile that cannot get out of the mountain cannot be launched. You do not need to destroy the weapon. You only need to seal the room it is sitting in. And for a period of time, it worked. Strike after strike hit entrances across dozens of facilities scattered through Iran's mountain ranges. When Iran brought in heavy construction equipment and began digging those entrances back open, even while a ceasefire was technically supposed to be holding, the strikes hit the digging equipment too. Iran kept digging anyway. Because here's the part of this story that the early coverage never fully explained. Intelligence assessments that surfaced in the weeks following the ceasefire revealed something that made planners genuinely uncomfortable. American officials had quietly warned that Iran was deliberately holding back launchers and equipment during the height of the campaign, preserving as much of its missile stockpile as possible. None of that should have been physically possible on that timeline. Iran's construction sector had been under heavy sanctions for years. Heavy equipment was scarce. The country was simultaneously trying to repair its power grid, its water systems, and its damaged refineries. According to officials directly involved in the damage assessments, Iran had beaten every single timetable that analysts had projected for reconstruction. Tunnels and roads assessed as needing months to repair were being reopened in weeks. That gap between the projected timeline and the actual timeline is not a rounding error. It is a signal about how much capacity Iran had quietly preserved. Capacity that existed outside the blast radius of every single strike, because it was never positioned near the facilities being targeted. And then came the number that mattered more than any other figure in this entire story. Estimates placed Iran's remaining underground missile stockpile at approximately 1,000 missiles. 1,000. Sitting inside chambers that had never been significantly damaged because every strike in the entire campaign had been aimed at the entrances. The doors had been destroyed. What was sitting behind those doors was largely untouched. Let that settle for a moment. But 6 months is not 20 years. The tunnels that took 2 decades to carve through solid granite were being reopened in weeks. The equipment that was supposed to have been destroyed was being replaced faster than anyone had modeled. And the missiles that the entire campaign had been designed to reach were still sitting exactly where they had been before the first bomb ever fell. Here is the honest summary of what actually happened. The United States built the most powerful conventional bunker-busting weapon in the history of warfare. It deployed that weapon for the first time in combat with a level of precision and stealth that Iran never detected until the moment of impact. It followed that strike with an entire systematic campaign. A second penetrating weapon making its own combat debut. Long-range bombers staged across an ocean. Strikes against dozens of underground facilities spread across multiple mountain ranges. Every conventional option available was used, all of it at the same time. But there was always a gap between the depth a bomb can survive falling through and the depth an engineer can dig into solid granite over 20 patient years. A gap between what a satellite can photograph from above and what sits in absolute darkness 100 meters below solid rock. A gap between destroying a door and reaching what is behind it. That gap did not close on the night the stealth bombers flew their mission. It did not close during the campaign that followed. It exists right now, today, while access roads get repaved and tunnels reopen quietly. Roughly 1,000 missiles are estimated to still be sitting inside those chambers. The chambers whose interiors were never reached by anything from the sky. The chambers where the only light comes from whatever Iran's engineers brought down with them when they dug this place into existence. The most advanced weapon ever used in conventional combat did exactly what it was built to do. The campaign built around it did exactly what it was designed to accomplish. And at the end of all of it, the question has not been answered. It has simply been deferred, moved to the next chapter. And the only people who know what is still sitting down there are the people who built it. And they are not telling anyone. Before you go, if this breakdown changed how you see this conflict, do one thing. Share this video. Not just like it, share it. Most people who think they followed this story only got the headline. They did not get the part about the 1,000 missiles, the decoys, the 7-week reconstruction, or the gap that no bomb ever closed. Send it to them. Because understanding what actually happened here matters far beyond this one conflict. It shapes everything about how the next one unfolds.